Welcome to Going Unbloated, everybody, home of the college football fan. And don't forget about the checklist. Hat check, sunglasses check, Pepsi check, notes check, sources check, and thick skin is a check. And don't forget to send gear to represent your team and yourself in my background. Send it to P.O. Box 360, Liberty, South Carolina, 29657, and get yourself a shout out. On to the next video. This will indeed be a Get It Gang video. If you don't know what the Get It Gang is, it's basically a name that I came up with for the group of people that leave video ideas in the comments section of my videos. So if you think you have a good video idea, leave it in the comment section of this video, and I just might make a video on it. Sometimes people aren't even leaving comments for a video idea, and I still like it enough to make a video on it. So keep that in your head. So there's 4 different Get It Gang video ideas that I want to use for the same video. The first one is from Kraken Hawk. What if Washington bailed on Oregon and paired with Stanford? Yes, that is the direction this video is going. The next one is from Bruce Wallace. Definitely not taking Oregon, talking about the Big Ten. I could see Stanford and Washington in 2030 or thereabout. I think Arizona would be a good addition for the Big Ten, but doesn't seem like the Big Ten is interested. Great comment right there. Next one is from Daniel Bitzer. Oregon and Washington are not going to the Big Ten. The Big Ten is not taking a crap market like Oregon. Looks like the bullseye is on Oregon as far as a no vote for the Big Ten. And finally, Jacob Wilson. Actually, you might have to keep an eye out for Washington State to the Big Ten instead of Oregon. So there's 3 separate comments that are telling me, yes, the Big Ten could be interested in Washington, but Oregon, they're actually not interested in Oregon. And everybody is like, well, why would the Big Ten not be interested in Oregon? Oregon is a major national brand. Not so fast. And listen, Oregon subscribers, I know you're watching, and I know you're probably going to get mad at this video, but just relax, okay? I'm not saying that Oregon is not a good football brand. They certainly are. But I think they've put up sort of a smokescreen because of Phil Knight and the Nike Association. That's made it seem like Oregon is a national brand. And Phil Knight does have a lot of money, and that would maybe perhaps pique the interest of the Big Ten. But they are not a national brand, and there are better academic schools in Pac-12 as far as pairing with Washington. Or maybe they scrap the whole Oregon and Washington idea altogether, and they take in Stanford and Cal. A lot of people are actually leaning towards the Big Ten grabbing Stanford and Cal and kind of imploding the Pac-12 from a roundabout way. Because honestly, if they pick up Oregon and Washington now, they could be looking at an antitrust lawsuit. But if the Pac-12 implodes, then they would be able to take those brands without a lawsuit. So there's the second thing that's working against Oregon and Washington for that matter. But on top of that, perhaps the Big Ten would be looking at Washington and Washington State, grabbing that in-state rival. I'm not sure that they would choose Washington State over Oregon, but it is surprising that Washington State does have such a large fan base. I didn't know this. Washington State actually has a top 25 fan base as far as the size of the fan base. They have one of the largest remaining fan bases in the Pac-12 once USC and UCLA leave the Pac-12. Well, basically, it's USC because UCLA, their fan base isn't that big, even though they're in Los Angeles. It's basically USC. But yes, they have a top 25 fan base in size nationally and one of the biggest fan bases in size of the Pac-12 once USC leaves. So perhaps that is enough for the Big Ten to take a look at Washington and Washington State, not Washington and Oregon. I'm getting a lot of this recently as far as people saying, no, the Big Ten is not interested in Oregon. Not saying that the Big Ten isn't interested in the Pac-12 at all, but it's specifically Oregon. Everybody is targeting Oregon. The Big Ten doesn't want Oregon. And then you have the response of, are you nuts? Oregon is a great football brand, a national brand. They're a good football brand, not great, and they are not a national brand. But they are affiliated with Phil Knight. They are affiliated with Nike, so there is some value to it. The question is it enough value to move the needle for the Big Ten to pick them up with Washington? Because remember, the Big Ten also likes academics. Look at some of the teams in the Big Ten. Northwestern, Illinois, Rutgers, Maryland, Indiana. Yeah, they have great academics. That's why they're in the Big Ten. So they could try to mix it up and say, we want a great football brand in Washington, but we also want a good academic school or elite academic school, and they could take like a Stanford or Cal with Washington, or the Big Ten might just want to focus on academics because they did grab football with UCLA and USC and take Cal and Stanford. Honestly, I'm just going to say this. I think it makes more sense for the Big Ten to grab Cal and Stanford. Number one, They got the great football brands and the TV market with USC and UCLA. Now they can focus on getting the elite academics, and that's getting Cal and Stanford. On top of that, UCLA and USC, they're over there on an island, and their schedule is going to be absolutely ridiculous. So you bring in Cal and Stanford, and that helps travels significantly for UCLA and USC. That's 2 more games that they get to play in the state of California instead of just 1 game against their crosstown rival. So yes, I would say that it is way more likely for the Big Ten to grab Stanford and Cal over Washington, Oregon, or Washington and whoever. But in this scenario, it's the bullseye is on Oregon. And yes, I do think Oregon would be below Washington, possibly below Washington State, but definitely below Stanford and Cal because of the academics. Look for the Big Ten to focus on academics. And something we talked about in the live show last night, if you notice conference realignment, these conferences going by sections of 2. They're not grabbing more than 2 teams. The only time a conference is grabbing more than 2 teams is if it's a reaction. So the Big 12 lost Texas and Oklahoma. They reacted by grabbing 4 teams because they were down to 8 members. 3 of those teams were from the AAC. The AAC reacted by grabbing a bunch of members from Conference USA. Well, Conference USA, they reacted by getting a bunch of independent and FCS teams. So the only time a conference has gotten more than 2 teams at one time is whenever they reacted because they got picked apart. So this is going to be phases of 2. Unless the ACC dissolves, then it could be a bigger deal than that because 8 teams are not going to vote to dissolve the grant of rights and only 4 leave. All 8 of those teams will want to be guaranteed a spot. So that's the only exception to that rule. So it could be the Big Ten is targeting certain teams to destabilize the Pac-12, then make it implode, then they get those bigger brands. So on top of all the reasons that I just mentioned, another great reason for the Big Ten to take Cal and Stanford over Washington, Oregon would be so they could destabilize the Pac-12 without getting involved in an antitrust lawsuit. By grabbing Cal and Stanford, you destabilize the Pac-12 even more, make it even more likely to implode. And if that happens, the 3/4 of the 4 corner schools, Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah, they wouldn't have any excuse not to go to the Big 12. In fact, I'll add an argument or a comment from a future video. So I will do a video on this comment because it's part of a thread that I wanted to look at. But I'm going to add it to this video because it makes sense to this particular subject. And this is from Cyclone Steve. If UO, Oregon, UW, Washington, went to the Big Ten, then the corners would have every reason to jump. What I'm talking about is not Washington and Oregon going to the Big Ten, but rather Cal and Stanford. I still think it's an either or. If Cal and Stanford go to the Big Ten, then yes, the 3/4 of the 4 corner schools see a Pac-12 for sure. I think there's already a chance right now for those schools to jump to the Big 12. But if any more teams whatsoever, whether it's Oregon and Washington or Stanford and Cal leave for the Big Ten, that's it. They are most certainly going to the Big 12. And so that would add on to the fact of the Big Ten trying to destabilize the Pac-12. You grab Cal and Stanford, then the 3/4 of the 4 corner schools are like, yep, we're done. Off to the Big 12. Pac-12's destabilized and imploding. That's when the Big Ten can swoop in and pick up Washington and Oregon. So y'all know in the comment section, after listening to this video, do you actually think that it's very unlikely for the Big Ten to get Oregon and whoever else you want to put in there, but basically Oregon is the target in the next round of conference realignment? On top of that, do you think it's most likely that the Big Ten will target Cal and Stanford in the next go-around? And if that does happen, do you think the Pac-12 destabilizes the 3/4 of the 4 corner schools, head to the Big 12, and then the Big Ten finally swoop in and get Washington and Oregon? That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.